last part of the section about kind of Muhammad and his kind of story. This title is called the Hijrah, and so this is all about the journey from Mecca to Medina, why they went, and then why Medina was a good place for the early Muslims to go. So on the map you can see there that Mecca and Medina are about 200 miles apart, and then there's lots of reasons that led towards this journey. And it's seen as a huge moment in the foundations of Islam and how Islam started to develop. And so we know that Muhammad and his followers were in a really desperate situation. They feared for their lives, and there was only one solution. And this had to be fleeing for safety to a place beyond the reach of persecution and oppression from the Makkans and the Quraysh tribe. This is what Muhammad did, and it was secretly orchestrated and executed. And it was also important, an event to Muslims, that it marks the beginning of a Muslim calendar. The Hijrah is known as the flight, and so this kind of marks year one in the Islamic calendar as well. It's also seen as a psychological turning point for the early Muslims as well, because this is when the first Muslim community was formed, and the Islam as a faith started to spread. And so we'll get into it in a minute, but I'll give a bit more introduction first of all. So Muhammad escaped a final murder plot that appears to have been poorly organised, and tradition tells us of Ali, one of his close associates, taking Muhammad's place in a bed that allowed Muhammad and Abu Bakr escaped from the night before. There are various embellishments to this story, but the general gist is that Muhammad spent 3 days in a cave and through various miraculous events managed to avoid his kind of pursuers as they sent trackers out. One story tells us of a bird's nest being at the door of a cave, so if the pursuers went in, the bird would obviously fly away. Also a cobweb was hanging over the cave mouth, and so obviously they couldn't be inside because there wouldn't be a cobweb there. And so there's all sorts of stories that embellish that and sort of make it more miraculous. This is also meant to show that this was an important event, and it was also inspired or helped by Allah himself. So, not all the reasons, though, for the Muslims leaving Makkah were negative. There are many attractive factors about Medina, and also we should not forget to acknowledge that although an escape from persecution, it was a warm welcome into a new world. So Muhammad was clearly remotivated after the night journey, where he travelled to Jerusalem, and he met Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and then this gave him an impetus to kind of start the Hijrah. So not only that, Medina was offering an environment in which to establish formal practices of Islam. So in addition, Muhammad was desired as an arbiter and offered high rank and status. And if he were to choose to leave Makkah and settle Medina, and most important of all, just as Allah provided protection for the escape, it is believed that such an environment conducive to the development of Islam in Medina was also the will of Allah as well. So let's make a start on the PowerPoint and take you through kind of the key ideas presented on your screen now. So the Hijra is word for migration, and the city of Medina was called Yathrib before it got its new name. Okay. So some of the events that led to the Hijra. So they're under persecution, they were being threatened, they couldn't practice their religion freely, and Muhammad didn't have much of an influence there. And many of the early Meccans didn't agree with what he was doing. So eventually, after all this persecution was going on, he was approached by some representatives from Yathrib, the city 210 miles away to the north of Mecca. Yathrib was a farming oasis and was divided by serious tribal conflict, and after some negotiations, Muhammad was invited to come as a mediator. And in the year 622, most of his followers gradually left Mecca for Yathrib, and in September, Muhammad himself, along with Abu Bakr, made the move, just avoiding an effort by his enemies to kill him. This event is known as the Hijra, or emigration, and is considered the most significant event in Muhammad's career, indeed of human history. The year of the Hijra was to become year one of a Muslim calendar. Yathrib was henceforth to be known as the city of the Prophet, or Medina for short. So, why was he welcomed into Medina? He was a superb politician. He was a statesman. He helped unite all these different tribes, and he was so good at this. And possibly because the tribes many of them were Jewish, they were waiting for a Messiah. and Muhammad possibly fulfilled this box as kind of a new Messiah, a new leader. Muhammad's reputation spread. Individuals from across Arabia began to come to Medina to kind of join him, and this was highly significant, as instead of owing primary loyalty to their tribe, people now began to owe their loyalty first and foremost to God and to God's prophet Muhammad. Muhammad was like a magnet, attracting people from many different tribal cultures who were united in a vision of obedience to God and building a just and fair society. One example which Peter Vardy gives is imagine a massive pile of Lego bricks. Each colour of the bricks kind of represents a different tribe or a different person, different status in society. And then as these bricks all get put together, you get a big, stronger, kind of like a big unit, a kind of big society. So it was Muhammad attracting to Medina all these different peoples, all these different tribes, all these different kind of peoples. And then this group was given a new name. This is where the word Ummah comes from. And Ummah means kind of brotherhood, community, and this is a distinct idea in Islam. So, why is Medina a good option? Muhammad would speak to people from Medina who visited Makkah, and they would spread the word when they returned. The Jewish people of Medina were also waiting for a prophetic figure. The people of Medina wanted to have claim to the prophet first. And the people of Medina agreed to protect Muhammad. They even requested Muhammad to send some teachers so they could learn more about Islam. The ruling tribes in Mecca, they felt threatened by this, and so they were obviously very, very against it. So a good question is, why did the people in Medina want to have the Muslims when the people of Mecca didn't? The people of Yathrib were the neighbours of the Jewish people for a long time, and every now and then a mention was made in their meetings and assemblies about the appointment of an Arabian prophet to the prophetic mission. So much so that the Jews used to tell the idol worshippers of Yathrib that the expected Arabian prophets would promote Judaism and destroy idol worship. These conversations created a strange readiness in the minds of the people of Yathrib, accepting the faith for which the Jews were waiting. So that when 6 people from, I'm not going to pronounce that one, met the prophet for the first time, they embraced Islam at once and said to one another, "It is the same prophet whom the Jews are waiting for. It is therefore necessary that we should express belief in him earlier than them." And so it was a competitive thing of getting the prophet first, or getting access to him first. Another factor might have prompted the people of Yathrib to embrace Islam was their mental and physical exhaustion. The harassment caused by disputes spreading over a period of 120 years had exhausted their patience. They were well nigh fed up with their lives and found all doors of hope and salvation closed before them. It was for this reason that when 6 people from the town heard the words of a prophet, they felt they had found what they had lost and said, "Maybe Allah may relieve us of this discord through you." And so he was seen as a person to stop conflict, bring peace, and kind of unite the tribes. So this is all about the Quraysh tribe, so the ruling tribe of Mecca, deciding what to do with Muhammad, and this forces him to leave. And so they decide, should they kill him? But they're worried about this. We should put Muhammad in prison, but feed him through a hole. They don't think prison will work. They should tie him to a camel and make the camel kind of run off. But he's also a good talker, and so worried about his supporters will attack them as well. And then the only way to do this, this is quite a bit of a sort of mafia idea really, is they say that they should get one person from each of the ruling families and jointly attack Muhammad in his house at night and cut him into pieces, and so that all of the families are jointly responsible for his death. And then so it's very difficult to kind of take revenge on all of the families if they're all responsible for Muhammad's death. So this is the end of the story. What happens is Allah informs Muhammad and they plot their escape. I'm just going to skip through a little bit of this. And so we're told that the assassins surrounded the house, but Muhammad escaped with help of Allah, as the assassins did not notice him leaving. The assassins went into the house, about to attack the bed, thinking Muhammad was asleep. They raised the sheets and saw Ali sleeping. They were shocked and ordered a search party for Muhammad. we're told that Muhammad and Abu Bakr hid in a cave. They were afraid, they were silent, and these two miracles formed: a bird's nest and also the spider web over the cave. The top right picture, that's the cave, and the bottom two right pictures there, sort of cartoons that kind of show what might have happened. And so the pursuers would have found the cave, they would have seen these two signs, the bird's nest, the spider web, thought he can't be in there, and they would have carried on. So this is sometimes a miracle or just a way of them showing Allah's on their side. So Muhammad stopped at a halfway point, and along with Fatima, the Prophet's Muhammad's daughter, the other women reached Muhammad. He was heavily wounded by the attacks the Quraysh had made and his protection of women, and they all arrived in Medina. Muhammad was welcomed as the leader, and they kind of accepted him. When he arrives in Medina, or Yathrib, this is year 1. So we're currently in, that's not quite right actually, it'll be after that, 1437, because the PowerPoint was made a couple of years ago, but you get the idea. Okay. So Muhammad settles into Medina. So the first thing he does is set up the first masjid. Masjid is a word for mosque. This is a public social centre. It deals with any problems in society. It's a place for discussion, and it's a place for gathering as well. They make a pact of brotherhood, so all of the different tribes are now treated as one. The Quraysh in Makkah were worried, right? So these are people. Their power has been challenged, and they have been left humiliated. This guy has kind of beaten them. He's escaped and set up a new town. And so they seize the belongings of remaining kind of Muslims, and they will sort of prepare to attack. Muhammad, while he's in Medina, still works on building relationships with people. They help him gather intelligence about what's kind of going on. And he tells the early Muslims to be kind of patient. So they're wondering kind of what happens next. This is quite an interesting quote because it shows the early ideas about kind of conflict in Islam. So Allah has now permitted them to defend themselves. Permission to fight has been given to those who are being fought because they were wronged. And indeed, Allah is competent to give them victory. They are those who have been evicted from their homes without right, only because they say, our Lord is Allah. So this is justification for them to defend themselves from the Makkans, right, from the Quraysh. The Jewish tribes of Medina entered into an agreement with Prophet Muhammad. They will protect each other if the polytheists launched an attack and were free to practice their religion. The problem of the hypocrites. These were people who were pretending to be Muslims, pretending to follow the faith, but weren't really. They would actually go off and worship their old gods or carry on being kind of Jewish and following those traditions instead. So there is mention of the hypocrites in there. Right, great picture of a camel here and the mosque in Medina at the top there. So when he arrives in Medina, he's met by these different tribes. There is a real problem he's got. All these tribes want to be more important than the other, want to have more status, want to have more access to Muhammad, want to have more of the wealth, more of a prestige, and so on. So Muhammad has got to mediate between all these different groups. And so one of the discussion points I have is like, where do we put the first mosque? If we put it over here, that tribe seems more favoured. If we put it over here, the other tribe seems more favoured. So what do they do? So what Muhammad says is he announces that a camel will decide. And so the camel wanders off. The first place it sits down, that's where the first mosque is going to be. And so it takes out any one tribe taking an advantage over the others. So it's quite an interesting little story. So let's have a look at the last little bits on this slide as well. I'm just seeing which bits are most relevant here. And so, as the first Islamic state, so the first Muslims start to settle in Medina, and when the first community starts to grow and the first ummah starts to develop as well, they start developing some of their morals. So social justice, peace, humility, modesty, equality. These are all values that they put forward in their first community. And then during this period, people come to Muhammad and ask him how they should live. And this is where the 5 pillars of Islam are developed. We have rites and rituals developed. We have rules on marriage. We have rules on business, money, international relations, so how we negotiate with other tribes, war and peace, and also talked about hypocrites, so people of a book. So in Islam, they do have a huge amount of respect for the Jewish faith and the Christian tribe. They're known as a people of a book because they worship the same chain of prophets which Muslims do as well. Okay, let's have a look at this next bit. Okay. So Muhammad demonstrates diplomacy, he demonstrates authority as well, and he's really good at dealing with internal divisions within the Medinan kind of community. He sets up a famous constitution to bring the different warring tribes in Medina together. And so he does this by saying there's one single Muslim community, the Ummah. The Jewish allies could be considered part of the Ummah, the Jewish tribes, and Muhammad was going to be the chief arbiter in all decisions, so he would make the final kind of decision. This makes it a good basis for their society. Okay, so this is where the 5 pillars of Islam kind of come from. He sets these up. We have Hajj to Makkah. We have the prohibitions against alcohol and kind of drinking. We have prayer. We have Ramadan, the fasting month. And the other ones, I've forgotten. Hold on. Okay, we'll carry on. And then, so the next bit is the response of the Meccans to the Medinans. So you have 3 battles which kind of take place. So the Meccans weren't going to take this lying down. So what happens next is what. So this next section talks about Muhammad as a political and military leader in Medina. So Muhammad had demonstrated tact and diplomacy in terms of his authority. His wisdom in dealing with tribal and religious differences was vital in such a delicate situation of internal divisions within the Medinan community. There were 2 dominant tribes in the conflict, the Aus and the Khazar. There were also 3 Jewish tribes, the Banu Qurayz, the Banu Kanaks, and the Banu al-Nadir. Added to this was a diverse mix of immigrants. The task facing Muhammad was to unite these disparate elements and justify this judiciously as possible. So Muhammad did this by developing the famous Constitution of Medina, an agreement that stipulated the following. There was one Muslim single community, the Ummah. The Jewish allies could be considered part of the Ummah, and Muhammad was the chief arbiter in all decisions. There were still problems with the hypocrites who displayed outward allegiance but schemed behind Muhammad's back. However, the influence of Muhammad clearly disabled any threat they might have made. Likewise, there were conflicts with Makkans on the outside, but these were dealt with in a different way. The external conflicts with the Makkans made Muhammad's newfound situation still with difficulties. This was a make or break time for Islam. Would it survive the external pressures, or did it need to meet the challenges head on by consolidating support and leading the offensive? It is the latter, forced into it by aggressors, that was to provide the answer and lead to what some of the scholars suggest refers to as the world's most decisive battles. The first one was the Battle of Badr. This is probably the most famous and influential of the battles, indeed such as its importance to the Muslims. So it was initiated by Muhammad's order to attack the Quraysh caravan during the sacred month when war was banned. Despite this unusual and possible uncharacteristic decision made by Muhammad, the surah called the Cow puts his actions into perspective and justifies its need. This is known as jihad by some and argues the case through the lesser of evils, which only Allah can be aware of. Probably the Muslims were going out to attack the Meccans to reclaim some of the possessions that they had lost when they'd had to flee Mecca to Medina. And the battle took place between 300 Muslims and thousands of Meccans at Badr. Muhammad was successful, and there were some significant and some determined opponents defeated in this conflict, notably some leaders in the Quraysh tribe. Muhammad's great success meant that those in Medina sitting on the fence joined Muhammad's cause, and the Bedouin affiliated themselves more readily. The second battle is known as the Battle of Uhud, and the relationship between the Ummah and the Jews was uneasy. They had rejected him as prophet, and they also had economic supremacy over the Hijaz. Muhammad provoked the Jewish tribes. 3,000 Quraysh marched towards Medina in support of the Jewish tribe that had been attacked. The Muslims met them at Uhud, 1 mile from the town, and were defeated and had to flee. However, only 70 of them were killed. What followed was quite remarkable given the circumstances. It was strange that the Quraysh did not follow up their victory. Instead, Muhammad led an army to Makkah the next day and camped outside for several days, lighting a large fire. This open defiance clearly lifted morale of his men after suffering such loss. And as Brown writes, Badr had taught the Muslims about victory. At Uhud, they learned the fortitude and the face of defeat. The final battle, known as the Battle of the Ditch or the Battle of the Trench, was quite an interesting one as well and quite an important one. So it's often called the Battle of the Ditch, and there were further disputes between the Jewish tribes and the Muslims, and this led to a great sense of uncertainty and distrust. It was not clear just who was supporting whom from within the Jewish population. The Makkans gathered some Bedouin legions and marched towards Medina with 10,000 strong army. Muhammad, still with a memory of the defeat at Uhud, took some Persian advice and dug a ditch around Medina. This meant that the enemy was open to attack and could not take rapid control without suffering mass casualties. Muhammad's forces were eventually victorious. The relationship between the Quraysh, the Bedouins and the Jews was now very fragile and fragmented. Muhammad straight away attacked and overcame the Jews, and gradually he overtook the tribes surrounding Makkah, then agreed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which was a 10-year truce. Under the treaty, Muhammad could enter Makkah for pilgrimage, and the Bedouin were converted and Islam started to grow.